Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Any other questions before we hop back into the other scene file?
No, dude, I'm already kind of got ideas,
All right,
so let's do
so
it.
we will move into here, and so here's a basic rundown of what I have. Um, I have the sky texture set up, and I don't have any. This has a sun built into the sky texture, so I figured that's probably just simplest way to do it. Um, Artistically, this is one of those things where I know that photography is different than cinematography. Um, so my idea, if possible, was to I really liked this particular lighting setup because we had some um, really interesting patterns. But of course, I knew that it'd be absolute chaos if we had our main characters inside of this nonsense. And
Right.
of course, we could possibly do something where if we had our characters over here, we could do a flag so that close-ups are not as crazy. But then there might be that jarring difference of the audience is seeing it's bright and now it's dark because we flagged it. Um, so
Yeah, so we deal with that actually a lot in real life because we'll go into a location and usually we never have quite enough money to make the sun do what we want.
right.
So a lot of times we have to deal with that. What I would say is in this case, especially because it takes way less time for a setup than it does in the real world, where you have to move physical objects in and out of a space. Um, what I would say is that just pick the table and chairs that are the best for the story.
Mhm.
And if that means that it's just the best for the background of some of the shots that you have planned, we also will block. So when I say block, just for reference, positioning of the actors and
Right, right.
with relationship to the camera and the location is what we would call blocking. So camera is part of that equation, and then it's the physical marks that the actors are trying to hit is the blocking. So when we block actors for a scene, a lot of times it's just practically done in the sense that it's like, okay, but the background looks nicer over there. So can we
Right.
have this conversation at an angle to where that's going to be in the background? Um, and we will also use a concept called cheating, which is where
Mm.
we'll shoot them. Say your characters are seated here, and this works for one character's over the shoulder because their background looks nice and kind of artistic. But then when you leave them in the same spot and you go to do a matching reverse on the other character, the background is not as good. In the real world, we will move them
Hmm.
physically in the space to find a good background, because as long as you're generally close, it doesn't register in your brain that it's not a perfect 90-degree angle. Like you can't tell when they shift. So a lot of times we're playing kind of fast and loose in a space just for visual aesthetics, because it would actually probably be more jarring to just have not a good background than it
Right.
would be to move them a little bit to get a good background. So if you're happy with the table and chairs here, then I'm happy. But don't feel bound by the lighting, because I do have techniques that we would use to kind of get around that in a way that makes sense. So it's kind of up to you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and that's yeah, very interesting. I think I'll probably start either here or maybe at this table. I'm even trying to think. Let me turn my lighting off because I've got some additional stuff here. Okay, yeah. So this is what it looks like with just the practical sun lighting. Um, I think the reason I chose this practically, in addition to lighting, because my thought process was, okay, there's lots of highlights and burnouts here. Um, oh, and I guess I should mention one of the reasons I have brightened this up and have this, purposely overexposed is to just give it that very everything is bright kind of look.
mhm.
Um, and I figured probably rather than toy a lot with the sky, I figured it'd be better to do that with the camera exposure. Maybe not, and again, that may be something to experiment with, but that was just my line of thinking. And then just I figured, hey, I'll put them in a location that I'll put them in a location where there's not all these caustics, and then light that to, basically try to make it work for the close-ups, and that way I'm kind of hopefully getting the best of both worlds. Now, the other thing I should mention, this may, as much as I'd like to hear some of those other ideas, the other reason I have them here is partly just where the initial camera is. So let me show that. That's going to be, this will have to be a slightly less a decreased quality preview. Give it a second to generate. There we go. So this will allow me to move around a little bit faster. If I set this as the main character, I'm sorry, main camera, and let me switch over to one of these other. I need the timeline here. So essentially, the way I set this up was to start here and then basically kind of jib the camera down to the characters.
Gotcha.
So that would be the secondary reason of having,
Well, and that's fine. So all that to say, really, that if you are happy and have justified them being there, then there's absolutely no problem. My only point was that,
sure, yeah,
if lighting was the only reason you did that, then there are ways around it. But if you have other reasons, there's absolutely no issue whatsoever. And in a real location like this, we would actually kind of view it the same way. Those caustics are super fun, but not on people, right? They're great background detail.
right.
And that's what we want, is we want to play them in the background, but we don't necessarily want them to play on our talent.
Right.
So in the real world, we would do a lot of work to block off the actual sunlight from our talent and then relight the talent in a way that seems justifiable, but is ultimately 100% controllable by us, and let the sun do the work in the background. And if we had a lot of money, we would actually probably block out the sun from the building entirely and then relight through the windows with our own units so that
Right.
they don't move. Right now, that is a problem that we do not have today, because your sun can stay exactly where you put it. So we can treat the sun as our own unit,
Mm-hmm.
and that can light the area, and then we just have to light the people in a way that makes kind of motivated sense from
Right.
the environment.
Right. And, just as a side note, this is one of the opportunities to use the camera clipping, because basically the camera's
Gotcha.
outside of the warehouse, but we're still able to see inside without having to do any kind of geometry hiding or anything like that.
Nice.
So,
So let's go ahead, and I'm going to ask a bunch of questions,
sure.
like if I were actually shooting a movie for you. So just to understand here, the way that these camera angles work is inside of that box is the actual renderable camera, correct? And then you're just seeing outside of the area as
Right.
well.
Right.
Okay.
So to kind of give you a preview, switching back over, um, I'm not sure how visible it is on the internet video that you're seeing, but basically outside of this box, it's a little bit darker, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
none of that gets picked up by the final render. It's
Gotcha.
more of there just for reference.
No worries.
Um,
So I was just making sure that
yeah.
that box is what we're actually paying
Right.
attention to.
Exactly.
So the next thing that I would ask is, what do you want this movie to be? Widescreen, like what we would call letterboxed, kind of cinema style, or do you want it to be more like your TV, like
Okay.
16:9?
That is an excellent question, and it's something. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because for some reason that hasn't crossed my mind. um, but yeah, so that is a good question. My instinct, as cool as like the cinema letterbox is in format, because this will likely. I mean, basically, this particular short film will be going up on YouTube. And so I think the 16:9 kind of the TV format I think would make more sense. But that's just my thoughts on it. I'm yeah,
I mean, I don't know, like, if, again, it's your thing.
sure, yeah.
I think a letterbox kind of evokes more feelings if you want to try and put it more in the cinema space. But if you're trying more for the television space, then 16:9 is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, like I said, that's that's an excellent question. I'm just trying to process all that right now, because I know that as much as that seemed like a small thing, it's a that's a big
Well,
thing.
it's going to inform all of our camera placement,
Right.
all of our lens choices, and a lot of our framing as well. So it is
Right.
important to know beforehand so that you don't work yourself into a hole, because then if you change it later, now you have to redo all of your camera,
Right.
From the beginning. So
Yeah, I
it
mean,
is in the order of operations, it should come closer to the beginning of the process.
so it's interesting. I guess my thought process is this: let's go with the letterbox, and the reason for it, like, even though this is probably just going to end up this initial short just on YouTube, some of where I want to go with later pieces of this story, the letterbox may make more sense.
Sure.
I
Well, and I
think that
will say that that's actually kind of a common idea. If you look at Lucasfilm, for instance, very popular show, The Clone Wars,
right.
is actually produced internally with a letterbox. It is filmed in the widescreen aspect ratio, and when they release it on television, they actually crop the sides off. So when you
Wow.
go actually to stream the episodes later, they'll stream it in widescreen, but that was not how they released on Cartoon Network. So if you go and look at the same episodes on Disney Plus now, there's actually material that was rendered the first time through that you never got to see on the TV because they cropped it after the fact, but they
Right.
have the whole master in their file. So they didn't have to go back and
Right.
reanimate and re-add all of that, So I think it is possible to do both in a way. And if you need to just frame for safety for 16:9, and you can cut the edges off later if you need
Yeah.
to. Um,
Yeah, let's go with that, because
so let's dive into the camera settings then,
well,
and I'll give you some settings for that.
yeah, in that case, and actually, I mean, one of the nice things is because we're not rendering this yet, we can of course change the resolution later. Um, I'm trying to think whether it'd be easier to change the resolution or just the aspect ratio. Or I'm trying to think if we have a safe area. I know Blender has some display settings on the camera, but I can't remember if there's a thing for the letterboxing.
Interesting. Well, let's see if we can change some settings in the physical, like, camera size.
Okay.
So the sensor fit. What are your options there?
Let's see. We have horizontal and vertical, and a bunch of presets.
Ooh, let's use a preset.
So we have probably some. We've got different red cameras, different black magic, Aries. It looks like.
Gotcha. So those are going to be the physical ones, and then so none of those are going to film in that widescreen aspect ratio natively. You'd have to crop it.
Sure,
does it let you set a width and height at the same time, or does it limit you to only one?
Well,
because right now it's vertical, but like, is the ratio fixed then?
Let me see.
Or can you edit both?
It looks like can edit both. I'm not sure. My guess is you can edit it, but basically, so there's two independent factors here. You've got the sensor fit, and then of course you have the actual viewport.
I see.
Aspect ratio. My guess is it's probably adjusting that to whatever's bigger here, if that makes sense.
So I'll just give you the actual numbers of what we're trying to replicate.
Okay.
So the sensor width should be 24 millimeters, and the sensor height should be 10.
Okay.
and that's technically actual film or whatever that we're emulating is a little bit like a tiny bit bigger. I think it's like
Sure. Yeah.
24.89, but this is close enough for government work. And then if we go back to the resolution, we can match that. So for 1080, it should be it's either 804 or 812. Let me just do quick math. 19, 20. So vertical should be 800. That's my correct to match that
Okay.
aspect ratio. So that's a clean. So that's not
Gotcha. Okay.
that's not like the official delivery to a theater number. We're doing a little bit of rounding,
Sure.
but
But
that's a 240 to 1, which is kind of mathematically what we're
right.
after.
Right. Yeah. And then of course we can change as long as we're keeping the ratio the same. We can change the particular pixels
Sure,
level.
and so that's something for you to decide when you want to know how hard to work your computer. But
Right.
this will allow me, and the reason that we change the sensor size, just for your audience, the reason that you change the sensor size when it's as simple as changing the resolution is so that my lens focal lengths that I'm going to think of things in my brain for
Right.
also match the field of view that I'm used to in a physical world. So that's the reasoning there for
Exactly.
changing
Yeah.
both. All right. So you already have a couple cameras set up.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
let's talk about.
let me make
Go ahead.
sure, just in case I forget and base something off of these, let me make sure that I copy the settings real quick. And that will make, that will make sure that we don't end up with a camera that's like, oh, what on earth is going wrong? And realize, oh, we didn't copy the sensor settings. And then finally, okay. All right, continue. Thank you.
So this scene, I read through it briefly, but I would like to know how you feel about what's happening in the scene, in the sense that, do you want it to feel kind of happy, or do you want it to feel just kind of mundane and normal, or does it need to feel a little dramatic? And then the other secondary question is one character more of the focus for the scene, or are they kind of both equal?
That's a good question. So probably the focus, I mean, I know the dialogue is certainly heavily focused on Robert's, which just for clarification, the character on the left is Robert's, character on the right is William. And so probably at least camera focus, the way I envision it, at least right now, is more on Roberts because he's the older of the two, more experienced. He's been a part of the military group they're in for much longer. So but he's also he's a little bit awkward and a little bit eccentric. So he's,
Sure.
kind of trying to, make a friendship with William, with William being new. William, just, without giving any spoilers, because for the audience sake, but William understands his another family member to be dead in addition to his parents, and so he hesitates in one of the lines for that reason. He's struggling with kind of being open about the whole thing, but he mentions some of it, that he lost his parents in air raids years ago.
Gotcha.
Um, yeah,
So going for a generally kind of semi-serious, more dramatic kind of idea.
yeah. It kind of the way I envision this is it's sort of a mundane thing, but also we're introduced. We might even get something at the end that I didn't include in the script, where maybe some audio of William's other family member to hint that basically there's more going on here. But at least on the surface level, it's kind of maybe perhaps dramatic. I guess the word I would use would be mundane. I guess it depends on how you think about it. But basically, it's kind of a run of the mill conversation that is hinting to something deeper under the surface.
Gotcha. Excellent. That's good information. So I know it seems weird and it seems like we're not doing a lot of work, but
No,
a
no,
lot of
that's
these
fine.
questions are going to
Yeah.
kind of come to a head really quickly. So as far as shooting this, um, the script that you sent and this scene is supposed to be self-contained, right?
Right.
Um,
As far as the production, yeah.
basically, this is playing as its own short film with no other context, right?
For now, yeah.
Okay. So,
Well, I mean, I'll mention that. So I think the answer is yes. I do have a bigger story that's a part of this, but I did.
I'll clarify why I'm asking.
Sure, yeah.
The reason I would ask is that we have not seen these characters before in this film, and we have not seen this location before in this film. So a
Right.
lot of times, when you're introducing people to a new location or new characters, you there are more rules necessarily in the sense that a lot of times you want to see the geography of the space so you know that where the people are and things like that,
Okay,
because it
yeah.
can be confusing sometimes if you don't know where they are or what's going on.
Gotcha.
Alternatively, you can use that psychology to your advantage.
Mhm.
So in fact, I'm actually going to suggest to you an interesting take in the sense that a lot of times traditionally, when you would cover a scene, right, you start with a wide and you show the room or the building or whatnot, and where everybody is, and you see an entrance and an exit or something like that, and then you have kind of a medium wide that would
Mhm.
also, you know, uh, have most of the people in the same frame, and then you would. You get into the conversation, and then you would have what we would call overs or over the shoulders or
Right,
OTSs.
right. Yeah, let me type this out real quick. This is not seeing the video. You'll probably see my notes, but basically, typically start with a wide, then move into OTSs. And did you mention the third one in between there?
There's like an idea of a medium wide, or
Right.
sometimes what we would call a two shot in this particular case, which would probably be both of them facing each other from a profile, so that you could see them. That's kind of the standard conventional way. Is you start with the widest and you slowly move in
Right.
as the scene goes on, and you introduce more information. And then you would pick up what we would call specials, which would be close-ups of very particular things. So if you
Right.
needed a close-up of him opening the can, if you wanted a close-up of nervous hands or eating food or things like that, you would come back later and pick up close-ups of small actions that you would need to cut in.
Yeah.
But I'm going to float to you a weird suggestion.
All right.
And so just by reading the script, and I'm not going to say anything out loud as far as spoilers, but
Well, this script you probably could say a little bit more. I just didn't want to give away a bigger part of the story.
fair enough. For something like this, you start with dialogue, and there's a couple lines that mention specifically opens can, gulps down drink, things, small details like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually thinking it might be interesting to hear the first line of dialogue, like over the, like, I don't know if you're starting with credits or things like that, but basically to hear the
Ooh.
first line of dialogue over black. And then when we come into the scene, I think it would actually be interesting to open on a close up of the can opening. And then
Okay.
to basically immediately start getting into closer shots. Probably, so you were talking earlier about the differences in types of coverage. What we would generally call it is dirty and clean.
Yeah.
So an over the shoulder dirty would have an out of focus shoulder of the person in the foreground looking at another person. But what we would call the opposite of dirty, in this case clean, would be if you didn't have that shoulder and it's just a single on the one person. So I think it would be interesting to start on a close up of that can opening, and then to have a single of who is it? Is it Robert? Is that the first one? Roberts, the one that speaks at the beginning.
Right.
Have a single on Roberts, but have a dirty OTS at Williams, and to start their conversation already in the OTSs.
Okay.
And
And
then when we get to a point where a little bit of the like where they kind of relax
right.
a couple lines in, then I would go to a um, a two shot of both of them, kind of like from the side of the table, kind of where the camera's like from the direction of where the camera's now,
Right.
kind of equally framed on both of them, and then I think after that you could just do matching overs on both of them. And honestly, I think it would be interesting to save the wide for the end. Does one of them get up and leave at the end? Is that
One of
the
them does. Yeah, I was wondering if that's where you're headed. Okay.
exactly? So to do this jib shot that I actually really enjoy, that you have here, but to do it in reverse. So
Mm,
at the end of the conversation, one of them stands up and walks away, maybe down that center aisle, and you use that jib shot kind of follows them up as they retreat into the frame, and then you finally see the whole room at the end. And the reason that I would suggest something like this is I find shorts, in my opinion, should not be 3-act structures like a whole movie.
right. Yeah.
In fact, it's almost worse in a short because you don't have time to get connected, and if you have a real character arc in a short, it almost feels rushed and you don't quite believe it because it
Right.
happens too quickly.
Yeah.
I really enjoy shorts when you sort of fall into a moment and you have no idea what's happening, and then you're sort of yanked out of the moment, and that's it. And it's
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
like
Okay.
this short because it's a scene. It's not a whole story arc. It's one scene, and it
Right.
leaves you with questions because you're not supposed to know everything. So I think it would be interesting, and this is why I would pitch shooting it the way that I would is to just drop the audience in, because what's going to keep them really intrigued and listening is because they have no idea what's going on.
Right.
So instead of shooting it in order, if you shoot it in the reverse order of types of shots and you sort of back out, you answer a few more questions as you go as far as the environment, but you're left with all the questions of the plot,
Right.
which I think would be a more visually interesting way to go about the standard shots than uh, kind of doing it traditionally. And if you'll notice, like none of those shots are revolutionary.
Right. Sure.
It's
Yeah.
just doing them in the reverse order. So it's not like we're establishing something that's hard for people to really grasp.
Sure.
But if I were shooting this scene in live action, that's how I would be very, very tempted to do it, is to kind of start on an insert, drop you like right in. Somebody's already talking. This conversation is in progress. And then the audience is like trying to piece it together as you go, which is from how I see it, how the script is written too. It kind of leads me in that direction anyway, as far
Right.
as
Yeah.
like we're just in a situation, here we are, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So I think it could be interesting to use the cinematography to mirror that emotion. If not, I would still be tempted to use those same shots, just in a different order. Um, but that's my first inclination for how to shoot it.
Right. And I like what you mentioned about, I guess, I love the way you describe, because that's something I also like to think about too for a short film of it really works well when it's a complete scene, but a scene that feels like it's part of a bigger story.
Exactly.
Because, it's too fast otherwise.
Well, the idea of a short is to leave you wanting more.
Right.
If you answer every question, like if you have a 3-act structure in a short, like why should I watch a feature length version of this if you
Exactly.
answered all the questions?
Exactly.
Uh,
But yeah, especially on like, I'm reminded how I was probably in my mind mixing the two, where it might make sense in a bigger context to do the jib shot at the beginning, because you're like, some parts of stories happened, okay, now we're in the mess hall and we've
right,
focused on the characters, but because we don't have that transition into it,
right.
then it doesn't necessarily work as well. So yeah, yeah, that's definitely, I think, a better way to put it. But I guess I am kind of thinking, perhaps even if I can mix the two, because the way I envisioned ending it would be kind of a single on William, who's contemplating, and I'm wondering if there would be a way to like sort of do that, but then maybe also almost like switch from his perspective of just sitting there, perhaps like and again, I'm just thinking about loud here, but would you recommend when doing that, I almost imagine like leaving William, but almost even more like an angle like this, if that makes sense. Would that be a better shot to end with, or do you think the straight on would be better?
So I'm toying with a couple ideas just so I don't appear silent.
Sure, yeah.
Normally, I do a lot of my thinking internally, but for the sake of you and the audience, I will explain my thought process. So
Sure,
my
yeah.
first inclination is, what if you did the jib shot and then you just cut back to a straight on single of Williams,
Okay.
and maybe you do a pull out, right? Maybe you just dolly straight back to kind of like leave him sitting in his thoughts. My other inclination is instead of two shots where you do a wide to have somebody leaving and then you do a pull out, what if you did a shot that was maybe the camera's at their level when they're sitting, right? And maybe it's wider in this case so that you get geography.
So I know, are we talking about William at this point?
Well, I'm going to explain it in a second.
Sure, yeah.
So maybe you have both of them in it, right? And you have a wider shot to kind of show the space. And is it Roberts leaves, correct? And Williams is left
Roberts
sitting.
leaves and Williams is still there, yeah.
So maybe in that case, Williams can kind of stand up and walk into the background, which we can see in the shot. Like maybe he walks like, he's still in the angle, but he's just walking out of focus into the depth. And then you could maybe kind of dolly or move the camera in such a way where the shot moves from the side, kind of where we're at now, but moves closer to being in front of Williams and closer to him. And so it reframes from a large wide to refocus you on Williams, and then you cut off of Williams at the end. That like the last frame would be him. I think you could kind of do it that way. It wouldn't be nearly as grand as a jib shot, but it could be interesting to have Roberts leave, and then as he leaves, the camera just slowly finds Williams, right? And it redirects you as like, okay, here's this big room, but in the room, here's the person who is doing the thinking and who we want you to leave the movie with. It was a second thought that I had, is like, well, maybe I don't need to be tied to a jib shot. Maybe I could do it another way. I don't know. I don't know if you want it to be kind of a smaller moment like that, or if you actually want to kind of be big and grand in that at the end there. But I think there are multiple ways where you could show the geography at the end and also refocus for the last moment to be Williams' face, I'm assuming.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so that I understand how that last one would work. I mean,
trying to think of a better way to describe it. How we're at the end of the table here.
Yeah.
So if you imagine we kind of start there.
Right. And then
you said Roberts is the one on the left, right? So he leaves.
Right.
And so we move from a position kind of like this to imagine there's a track on the floor that runs under the camera, and it's perpendicular to the table right now, but then it curves behind where Roberts was sitting.
Oh, so it'd be like,
so we do a little bit of a circle,
and then like this.
No, so behind the other way.
Oh, okay, so
you see his face,
right?
Yeah. So what if it comes over here and then we refocus on him, right? So as he leaves in the background, the camera kind of orbits from his side to his front.
Good. Yeah.
Orbit is a better word, maybe. Makes more sense. But you could choose a lens that's telephoto enough that when you're sitting here, it doesn't seem so wide, and you can start it farther back on the at the beginning, and maybe it comes closer and around, so that you end up with more focus on the character. But that's the idea of the move, is being from the side, kind of perpendicular to the table, and looking at both of them. And as one of them leaves, the camera sort of motivates itself to the person that's left. If that makes sense.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess the idea with that is we would see all of this geometry back here, but then we'd
right.
also focus on William. Okay.
The other thing you could do, you could do a type of jib shot. So maybe the camera's in kind of this position, but kind of high and tilted down.
Oh, like this?
Yeah. A little bit, yeah. And so Robert starts there.
In fact, let me create a camera real quick, and maybe I'll keyframe this out, like just a simple simple set here, just so, because yeah, I think I'd like to have some sort of jib, but yeah,
for sure, we can definitely watch this. We're gonna have a moment right here. It's gonna be great.
Let's see here. Something. I think I'm too close. Let me see if let me pull this backwards. Yeah, sorry, give me a second to. So this will be
no worries.
Camera, and let's see. I've got certain things locked so I don't accidentally select it. And come on, it won't. I'm not sure which setting I'm missing. Anyway, you can continue while I figure out what's going on here.
Is it trying to place the camera inside of that wall? Is that what's happening?
Well, perhaps. I think the problem is, actually the clip start is all wacky. I think I set the wrong one. But for some reason it's not. I might have to just delete and start over. Oh, I see. Okay, I've still got the I still got the wrong camera selected. So in this case, what I've got to do, create a new camera, and then all right, we have that. There we go. Just some of the technical setup here, and then something like this, and I'll adjust it. There we go. And
so in this, since we made a new camera, we just need to make sure that the settings are the same.
Yeah.
And then let's change the focal length. So 24 and 10.
All right. Yeah, I got it.
And then let's change the focal length to, let's start at like 21. And we'll see if that's enough, and we might end up zooming in. So
this is what I have right now. Let's see.
Gotcha. Let's start it a little bit. Okay, do like 16 millimeters instead of 21.
All right.
Let's start it a little bit lower.
All right, so let's see, maybe something like that. Even more.
I'm trying to think about how best to get space.
I wonder, do we want to be closer in?
Well, so I was gonna basically what I was gonna do is I was gonna start high and wide, and then jib straight down, and tilt up, so that in the end you end up with him in the foreground, and maybe it pushes in as well.
Right. Almost like,
I'm just trying to think about how to see as much of the room as possible at the beginning. But let's.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly back this up again and do a clip. So, something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Let's stay about there, but maybe we actually shift the camera left so that he's placed more on like the right third. Yeah, like that. And so we'll say that what's his face gets up and walks down that aisle, and as he does, the camera goes straight down, but kind of, and then kind of pushes in on our hero table, if that makes sense. So we'll slowly
Roberts
drift.
gets up and leaves, and then we go from, let's say here. Let me add a keyframe. So something like here to do we end up in something like this location?
We could. I was thinking it might be better with this idea to end up more in profile.
Okay,
so if you kind of place the camera near the end of the table,
something like this.
Yeah. And yeah, so if you reframe on him there, so that the final like emotional beat of that would be his face, right? Would be the primary focus.
Hold up, let me get the rotation as well. And so yeah, so basically we go from here and then move in to where we're looking something like that.
Yeah.
And then rotation.
Maybe a little more centered for him.
A little bit more.
Like that. Okay. And maybe we rotate the camera to where we're just a little bit more in front of, or not Dutch angle, but like like that, to where we're a little more in front, so that we get to see a little more emotion.
Do we want to see
something
both
like
eyes?
That. It can be either or, I think, because a lot of it would be the strength of if you can play the emotions you're looking for on his face. But that can also be a tweak that you can literally tweak that up, like right up until you press render for the final time.
Sure, yeah.
But is there a way for us, without all the complicated sims, is there a way for us to see kind of what that animation would look like if it would be super, super jarring?
So, well, this is obviously we'd have to change the time, and we'd also have to fix. So
right, because it's auto kind of.
Yeah, it's basically just a perfect what we would need to do. In fact, let me set up one real quick. I could set up where the cameras are always pointing at his head.
I feel like that probably wouldn't work nearly like we want.
I mean, I could add a quick in between keyframe about there.
The height I think is working. I think it's really just the tilt is probably all we need to work on to maintain him kind of on that upper right third for his head.
Yeah. So maybe even, let's see. Maybe something like there. That might, of course, we can change the timing. That's almost it. Obviously, there's kind of that.
Yeah, but that
we'd have idea. To smooth it out and whatever, but maybe something like that.
Right, and so the idea of this shot is it shows a little bit of geography and kind of you see you see the exit of the character, right? So he doesn't just disappear.
Right.
But it also leaves you focused at the end. And then you could vary the focal length as well, and you can change that up till the end as well about how close you are to him at the end.
Oh, you should change the focal length?
Yeah, so it's a wide angle lens and we're kind of close to him. And that might look funky in the end. But also it could be interesting. I don't think there's a right answer in this particular case. Yeah, obviously you couldn't get too close.
Something didn't work right.
Okay. Oh, it like popped to a 50 millimeter there at the end.
Yeah,
is it animating the focal length or is it just stuck?
Yeah, I'm adjusting it just to experiment. Basically, this would be. Yeah, okay. So the transition would need some work.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be that dramatic necessarily. I would maybe go into something like a 28 or something like that. I wouldn't go all the way to 50, because again, it's going to be too
Right. Yeah.
obvious that
Right.
you
That you're
you hid
doing.
that in there.
Right.
But that way, it's not like sticking a 16 millimeter in somebody's face, which would probably be a bit over dramatic.
Right. Right. All right. Yeah, I mean that's definitely giving me some ideas. I mean, I'm tempted to try to figure out how to get this like almost completely
All of it,
wide, and then
right?
maybe like
Well, and so that's why originally I was kind of thinking that maybe the best is just the simplest option, which is you keep the jib shot that starts at the table. Basically, you play your jib shot in reverse. It starts at the table and goes up, and you see Robert's exit, so that that piece of movement makes sense, and then you just cut back to a straight on shot just across the table, and it slowly kind of drifts back
uh
to kind of like leave him there,
so y-
which is that first option, wide jib shot, single William pull out.
okay, yeah.
Might be the easiest way to
To get
combine those
that, yeah.
ideas. Maybe in this case, sometimes maybe the simple idea is better, but
Hmm.
there
Yeah,
are
yeah.
there are options for how to get a lot of these requirements that we're looking for.
Right.
Um, and again, that's up to you to play around with up until the end.
Sure, yeah.
Um, but uh, yeah,
This concludes part 2 of Lights and Camera. All right. Well, thank you again, Nathan, for showing just all this amazing information. If people want to, see your work and all that, how can people find you on the internet?
the best way to kind of keep up with me, honestly, is my Instagram account, which is at Nathaniel Paine underscore DP. Um, my first name is spelled differently though. It's NathanaelPaine, Nathaniel Paine. And there'll probably be a link to that in the
Hmm.
description. I have frames from my video work up there, and I have a lot of my personal photography on there as well, which is also in my aesthetic realm. And I respond to things very quickly on there. So if anybody has any questions or just wants to talk about any of this stuff, I am a film nerd. So more than happy to have people reach out to me there. And I'll get back as soon as I can. I think I'm also going to give James a link to an interesting project that we can link here as well. But yeah, that's the best way to kind of get a hold of me.
Awesome. Yeah, and the information will definitely be in the description.